Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media. And welcome to our Friday morning edition. And today we're going to be looking at the cybercrime goldmine with 1.5 million students and 130,000 full-time staff. Australian universities and the education sector more broadly is certainly a prime target for cyber criminals. So we're going to be joined by Lindsay Brown, the Vice President for Asia Pacific with LogMeIn. So he's our only guest today, but we can sort of deep dive into both the LogMeIn business, LastPass, and then also Lindsay's observations across APAC. As we do, we cover off on aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. We should be streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And this one will go out as a Cybersecurity Weekly podcast as well. And we'll go for at least 30 or 40 minutes, I imagine. And there's a few other things I wanted to cover off at the end. Welcome to Say G'day and let us know where you're listening from, and also contribute if you want to make a comment or ask a particular question of Lindsay. Also, a bit of a catch-up, what we covered off on Tuesday. We did a special edition Tuesday evening, and I crossed over to Sweden and the UK. I interviewed Leo Livet, who's the chairman with Onviv, and we looked at their latest profiles, M and D, for video surveillance systems. And then we did a special interview with the UK and looking at the UK space industry, and an interview with Paul Williams, who's the founder and director with Black Arrow Space Technologies. And the edited version is out with a launch demonstration of Black Arrow as well in their maritime launch platform. Very interesting, and also covered off on the UK-Australia Space Bridge, which has recently come out. On Tuesday next week, we've got working from home, so we'll stick with this cybersecurity theme. And Paul Hadji, who is the CEO with Harungi Cybersecurity. Haven't practiced that name, Harungi. And we'll have a look at the Southeast Asian market and the misconfigured cloud infrastructure that they've been looking at as well in terms of the cybersecurity risk. And coming up, August 10 at 2 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time, we've got a CISO panel session with the head of security with Flybuys, Alex Lazal, and also Nick Savides, who's with ForcePoint. So you can go to our Learn Security platform for that and register, and that'll be a live webinar. Our latest Cybersecurity Weekly podcast, and this follows on from last week also, where I spoke to Kashira Sagar, who's the Chief Data Officer with Latitude Financial Services and Understanding Data Literacy. A lot of attention on that one. Very good interview and some great analogies from Kashira as well. He knows his stuff in terms of data science. Thank you to our sponsors, IT Glue, and their IT Glue webinars are on our marketplace, and also Secure ID, which is an RSA business in their ID suite. If you want to support the channel, please check out MySecTV.shop. And otherwise, that's enough from me and the marketplace. And without further ado, I'll bring on Lindsay Brown, Vice President APJ with LogMeIn. Lindsay, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me on. No, great to have you. And let me just get my captions right so I can see you. Lindsay, we had a bit of a sort of pre-interview discussion, and LogMeIn's quite a large company as well, based out of Boston, I just learned. Maybe introduce us to LogMeIn, and then we'll sort of touch on LastPass, and then I think that'll be a good segue into your observations around some of your clients in the university and education sector. Yeah, sure. Sounds good. So LogMeIn, global company. So we've got, it's interesting, right? I would typically have said probably 12 months ago that we've got 20 offices globally. We've got offices in Sydney and Singapore and India and so on. And there was a time actually this year where we were in the Sydney office, which was fantastic, right? So, think about all the usual locations across Europe and the US as well. So Boston headquartered, as you said, but these days when we talk about it, mate, we think about it as having 4,500 offices that we've got to house our employees at home. Or one virtual, eh? That's it. So everyone works remote. We're very much a hybrid. We say that we're remote centric. So in the sense that the office is still a place that we get to and we collaborate and do our work, when we need to, but then otherwise, the bulk of our work is certainly done, virtually, working from the home office, or otherwise, when we can, obviously, and we're out of the confines of lockdown, we're out there with our customers and our channel partners and talking about LogMeIn. Well, it's been a good time, really, I suppose, for LogMeIn with GoToWebinar and GoToMeetings. Is that been sort of the main driver of the business over the last 18 months or so? How did you find that sort of uptake?
Yeah, it's interesting. So if you think about LogMeIn, we call ourselves, or we think of ourselves as being positioned well in helping, small business, big business, anything in between,
Yeah,
across all industries, being able to work from anywhere. All
yeah,
right, and that's been accelerated, obviously, given what's happened over the past sort of 12 months or so with the pandemic. And so collaboration is big, and you mentioned the go-to brand, but also is making sure that you keep yourself secure when it comes to being able to operate your business and your personal life secure. And we're going to talk about that today, obviously. And the last piece there is also making sure, as a company, you can keep the lights on, or otherwise you can keep the lights on for your customers. And what I mean by that is offering remote support tools. So in other words, if you've got an issue and I work in IT, I can come in and jump on your phone or jump on your computer and help sort of resolve those issues with you live, so you can get on. And obviously the buzzword business continuity is big there.
yeah.
And everyone was scrambling to make sure they could do that when we first hit that round of lockdown, right? So work from home was something that obviously we could help straight away, because it wasn't foreign to us. We'd been doing it before, and as I said, things had accelerated. So think of it as collaborate, secure, and support are the main areas that we help our customers and our partners with.
And you cover the whole business. So maybe what's been your observations and across the region? Did you find the response, the requirements was pretty much the same across the region, and everyone sort of jumped on with? If we look back at March 2020 and through 2020, it's almost a distant memory when we do look back. It was so intense. How did you find the business operated across the region in relation to that period of time? And maybe a benchmark to Australia. How did you find Australia's maturity and readiness for something like that?
Yeah, so if you look at the sort of the areas that sort of come into where I observe things most. So we've got a team based out of India, a team in Southeast Asia, and we've got folks here in Sydney and also based out of Melbourne. They moved at pretty similar paces, I would say, in sort of response to the circumstances over the past 12 months, but it happened in waves. And so it was very much, I would say it was a minor state of panic to start off with. It's like, what the hell do we do? And so there was a big scramble for sort of the usual suspects when it came to doing things like webinars like this, for instance. How do I market and run my virtual events? Making sure customers wanted to make sure, obviously, they could shore themselves up in being able to collaborate and have virtual meetings and so on. But we also saw pretty quick moves from a lot of industry in making sure they could support. So business continuity was huge.
Yep.
Right. And so, our tools like the Rescue Suite, for instance, and making sure that customers could continue their business, and IT had a means by which they could, satisfy requests pretty quickly, was something that, we had to respond to and make sure. It's interesting though, right? Because really the third wave, which, we're going to talk a whole lot more about today, was security. And in a lot of respects, it was overlooked.
Yep.
It was overlooked.
Well, I think it's one of those things of security is often put aside for convenience, and that's a natural thing, because business needed to have. There's no point thinking about security until you've got that connectivity. I think there were a lot of companies not even sure if they would even have connectivity enabled to work remote. Once they'd established the connection, things like the VPNs came into play, and then they looked at the security team. So the IT teams were probably just establishing business first, which I think in hindsight is fair enough. It's something you have to do, but it's having that readiness and business continuity plans, and that's why it's so important to be planning and preparing. And this does take us right back into what we want to talk about with universities, who have had to do the same thing, and the numbers are kind of large. You think about a large corporate with maybe 1,000, 5,000 employees. That's a reasonable sized company, and that's a challenge. But when you're talking about universities with thousands and thousands of students all over the world, often, and then also their staff, that really does create quite a unique circumstance, and hence why we're seeing so many cases of universities and education being compromised.
Yeah.
Again, maybe what's your observations there, and how are you working with this particular sector, universities and education, and where do you find their pain points are?
So we've observed a lot over the past number of years. I would say we've partnered with a lot of the universities, tertiary institutions, pre-pandemic, during and afterwards, and obviously things have changed quite a bit for them, as you mentioned, right? Hugely complex in the sheer volume of students, lecturers, folks that sit in faculty, not uncommon for faculties to be managed in different ways.
Yeah.
And there's a huge amount of information they've got to contend with, anything from sort of the more obvious when it comes to personal information, name, address, credit card information of students and so on. And then also, links back to industry, there's, confidential information,
Yep.
research, all sorts of things, right? And now that's totally been exacerbated, and universities have really had to, and they've been challenged on their business models, right? Because international students and so on were a big part of that revenue stream, and now they've really had to think about, well, now how do I, as a university, still offer those services? And the virtual learning environment, those open learning environments, and coupled with everything else I just mentioned, is a real big, complex challenge in terms of plenty of entry points for cyber criminals to exploit and to be able to, take advantage of various situations.
Well, we've got some pretty high profile. If we think back to the Australian National University breach, with some sort of 20 years worth of data that was taken, I think that would have been 2019. And I do use it in one of my talks that I give on crisis communication. They did a very good report on looking at that, but there's been a range of others. And I'm just going to rattle off a few just to kind of set the scene for what we're talking about. And these are just off our Cyber Risk Leaders magazine website, and also the Australian Cybersecurity magazine. I think this was just out a week or two ago. Operation Spoofed Scholars, and this is a group overview masquerading as UK scholars with the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. Then we have the New South Wales Audit Office report out a week or two ago on significant vulnerabilities at Sydney Trains and Transport New South Wales. And that is on the back of the New South Wales Education Department cyber attack just prior. That's only a week or two ago as well, just before term 3 started. And that was quite a significant issue for them. Then we've also got a report out from Sophos a week or two ago. Education suffered more ransomware attacks than any other sector in 2020. And that's the Sophos State of Ransomware in Education report that's on the marketplace. May, cyber attack sees University of South Australia systems shut down. And then we've also got a report there. University of Queensland went with Tenable for theirs. They didn't get attacked, but certainly making a bit of a sound. Sometimes you can be on the front foot with coming out to the market and say, hey, we're addressing this as best we can, and this is who we're partnering with, this is what tools we're using. And this is where your interview came from, Lindsay, yesterday. You've been working with Deakin University and some of their sort of approaches. Maybe talk us through what you've been doing with Deakin. You don't have to go too deep, but yeah, what was the premise of the work that you've been doing with Deakin, and then maybe how that sort of fits with other work that you've been doing in this sector?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You sort of led in there and you spoke about sort of the spoofing and so on, right? And that area in particular, various cyber criminals sort of acting or, pretending to be something that they're not, is a really common means by which we see these breaches, come about. And the means, and you mentioned these various reports, and we know also that the Australian government, for instance, keeps a database of all data breaches, right, through the National Data Breach Scheme, and that's been going on now for probably, I think it's about 3 years or so.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's in universities, it's in private industry, it's in big business, it's in small business. But what is really consistent, Chris, is the fact that 80% of those breaches, and this is reported every single quarter by the government, and you can even go on to scamwatch.gov.au as well to see this from a consumer standpoint. It's the reuse of passwords that is the cause. So weak stolen, but very much the reuse of passwords, weak passwords, which is the cause of a lot of these breaches.
And it's the compromised credentials, really. Once they've got a legitimate credential in, no system's going to detect that, really, because they're not breaching anything. I think that's another thing I'll make mention of in terms of universities, and something we've spoken to some universities directly with. They also have the threat landscape also includes the students. A lot of students are studying cybersecurity and they can often, and they're always looking for a shortcut, a workaround, even things like plagiarism and other systems that they have to work with as well. So the insider threat is also relevant here. And I imagine things like sharing credentials is another issue that you have as well. And another thing I've heard from researchers is they don't often follow policy very well. They're focused on their research, and they're a bit hard to get through to in terms of cybersecurity and their own information security sometimes as well. What do you do? What does LastPass do in relation to potentially solving this problem of credential security and making it also convenient for the user? We talked about before, convenience will override security most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've captured the challenges really well there, right? So we see quite often things like, I mean, you think of us as for us is how we behave. So think about, I don't know, your Netflix password, or even think about the student that accesses their Netflix account. Are they really going to use something different to access any part of the university that they might be trying to get access to? More often than not, they just reuse that password, right? And we see that behavior time and time again, which is, when you think about it, it can be forgiven, because, if you look at the average phone that someone carries around, it's got 80 or so apps on it, and it's mission impossible to have 80 unique, long, complex passwords. I'm thinking 25 characters or more. Nothing that you can guess and would, can't easily be hacked. Like that's something you just can't do. It's impossible. But the human behavior behind it is, well, the path of least resistance. And so time and time again, that's what we see. So, if you look at the challenges in the universities, sharing passwords, sending them via email, or, we hear time and time again, compromise comes from just a sticky note that's left on a screen, for instance. Right, just the old school stuff, or storing stuff in spreadsheets, right? That's the challenge. And so, what we try to do is really sort of navigate the human behavior and take the burden, that cognitive burden of having to remember all those passwords and store it in something like LastPass, for instance, which is a password manager. All right, and so that eases things.
Talk us through, so let's say I'm a CISO at a university, and I would never take that job. That sounds like a real job to me. How am I going to work with you in doing this? Let's say, I've got 20,000 students, 2,000 staff spread all over the place. How do I roll this out? Because I've looked at LastPass, and even for our team, and it was... it's not complicated, but you got to have a plan and make sure everyone's up to speed on how they're going to use it as well. What's the rollout process, and how do you tackle something like this if a client comes to you?
Yeah, so we've got a dedicated team that works. So when any organisation purchases LastPass, they get a dedicated customer success person that's allocated to help them with the rollout and so on. And so they're a live resource. There's someone that works on they work on a couple of areas, right? It's just as much, how do you project manage the rollout of the tool, but then, even as you're talking about, right, what's even more important is making sure that you're driving the usage and adoption of that tool. Because it's one thing to roll out something in the sense of IT. That's easily done. You get it out there, it's installed and so on, but there's no point having the tool there unless it's used. All right. And so that's really where they come in, is they help, and they usually try to couple the education process into things like cyber awareness programs, for instance. So, helping, much like I spoke with you on, Chris, around sort of the behaviors that we have in terms of how we access, our phone at home, and then, just take that path of least resistance and use passwords across our personal sphere and then also our business or, studying sphere, if there's such a thing, then that's the risk. But we need to educate people on that, because it's not really thought about that much. It's almost like automatic or habitual behavior. And so, we need to take people through that, and we usually build that into the cyber programs, and we've got, various pre-built, materials that can help with that.
Do you approach it in terms of, say, an identity access management program? Is that what's the terminology you use to roll this out, or is it sort of an access control approach? Do you understand? Do you know what instead of how they develop this, privileged access management or identity access management, or is it more on sort of credential and access control? How do they sort of plan this out and roll it out in that regards?
It's probably more the latter, I'd say, just because that's more of a general catch. I mean, there are those other areas that we tackle that are a bit more specialised, but when you're trying to address the general populace, they identify more with working through something like cyber awareness rather than identity and access, which can it sounds a bit it's not something which they usually hear about on every day.
Yeah.
People relate to passwords. People relate and understand in terms of how they use their applications and how they access them. And so, providing them with that cyber education on, the different means by which how they, access their applications at the university and within the home environment across their devices is usually where we come in. And so we try to anchor ourselves within those cyber programs which might exist, or otherwise, they're going through the process of creating those. And so we help in terms of providing the materials when it comes to passwords, and we call it, rather than identity and access, we call it password hygiene.
Got it.
So making sure that people have good hygiene around how they manage their passwords, and they have the confidence in using a password manager to do that.
And is it across the board in that regard in terms of that password hygiene? So it doesn't really matter if they're a student or a staff member. Is it ranked, or is it really just access to a particular website or a particular platform that you push the LastPass policy out to, that they have to have LastPass installed and using it to access that particular application?
Yeah, so we manage so there's a capability, and you said the word yourself, there's a capability within the product, because the environments are so complex. You want something like LastPass to be pretty agnostic in terms of the systems that it integrates with. So, your various SSO platforms like Okta, for instance, it'll plug straight in. You think about your various user databases, Azure, for instance, as an example, but we plug into all the other major players as well. And so that's a big piece when it comes to large enterprise rollout, and you're thinking about a university on the technical side, but then also there's the different use cases and different user populations. So you would absolutely discern between, who would be a internal IT person that works within the university versus a lecturer and the content and materials they may have access to, and then the open and learning environment that a university student would have access to, and that is governed by what we call policies. And so there's a bunch of pre-built policies that sit with LastPass that cover sort of 80% or so of the various use cases that we've come across, and then you can build your own as well to make sure that you're taking care of those different means of access, depending on the sensitivity of information, the role and persona of the user, and so on. And that has some interesting benefits beyond that as well, in terms of visibility into password hygiene and good habits and so on.
I suppose it also gives you sort of insights into what people are doing on using those credentials. And I've got the media release that came out with LogMeIn and Deakin University, and I'll just read some of it. Deakin University uncovered staff for not using secure methods to store and share sensitive information, including personal identifiable information such as credit card numbers, passport details in spreadsheets saved on shared drives, which makes stealing credentials rewarding for hackers. So once they're in, start moving laterally, they've got access to all of that, and they're obviously looking for a password management solution. And just one other here, since the development, beg your pardon, since the deployment of LastPass, the university discovered users have been using their Deakin credentials for unauthorized third-party sites such as social media. The solution has also aided in allowing seamless transitions. This is definitely PR written for newly hired and departing employees. That's a big one too, departing employees, and making sure that transition's managed. Saving time and effort as a result of the university no longer needing to reset passwords. So there is a clear business case there for them in relation to this. Who do you deal with often? Who's your client front face? Is it sort of a systems engineer or the CIO, or who do you find often gets given this gift to manage the frontline credential management for universities?
So we definitely work with the CISO, and then there's also folks within the IT org, the admins and so on, that help with the implementation of that. But it's always been a decision that we work directly with the CISO and then the CIOs to make sure that it's understood, the challenge is understood in terms of, very much as I said, right, the people being the parameter. If you've got 40,000 students, you've got pretty much 40,000 different remote working areas you've got to contend with now, right? And that's a totally different threat landscape. And so, when you start talking about those different areas, when I said that, you share or reuse these passwords and you get one good credential, as you said, and you're in, that's the keys to the kingdom, and that's a huge risk, right? And then once that's understood, then that's sort of the direction of the conversation that it goes, right? But there's some really helpful reminders in there as well, right? Like taking away the things like password resets. You can put that in the policy and make sure that a password is reset automatically, so you don't even know. You don't need to know the password anymore, which is fantastic. All right, and you make sure it's got the right mix and the right strength. We know, quite factually, given the amount of installations we've done across enterprise and universities, that password resets alone, they can cost $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 a year in terms of IT time and effort just to field those calls, get the password reset, and
and they can often be a vulnerability in themselves as well.
Absolutely.
It's been a while since I worked at a large corporate, but we used to change people's passwords for them just as a daily prank. But that's how easy it used to be. So we have come a long way, and we're getting to that passwordless, almost the usernameless sort of approach, and it's also the user expectations. And maybe we'll finish off on that. Is how do you manage the user expectations and the behavioural change? You talked about security awareness training around that.
Yep.
Do you find it needs to be there? It's an opportunity to engage with the end user and educate them a little bit more about hygiene, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. There's a few different angles. First and foremost, LastPass starts as a free product, all right? So it's not uncommon, even probably, when we looked at Deakin and other universities that we'd work with, a big population already has LastPass. All right, so there's a consumer-based product which is downloaded, and a lot of folks already use it. And it's not uncommon when we open the door and we talk to the CISO and the CIO that they're personal users of the product as well. So on the adoption front, some of the work's already done, because when when an enterprise or a university purchases the product, the personal and the business components of LastPass sit nicely together. Right, this was one integrated experience. And then, you spoke about when someone leaves. Well, when someone leaves, they leave their corporate credentials, so to speak, but they always keep their personal credentials. That always travels with them, right? And so that's a big part of the value prop. It's smart as well, right? So you install the tool, you get started, and it's it can help you. It understands what you've got in your favorites in your browser, for instance, and that will help you go through that and put your passwords in there. Unfortunately, that is a security concern of just using the browser, right? Your passwords are stored there in the clear, so LastPass can grab them and chuck them in there for you. But all those things make it easy, and then as you go along and as you start using the tool, when you enter a username and password, whether it's new or otherwise an existing one that then LastPass will prompt you, do you want to add this to your vault? All right, and then it provides guidance. There's some wonderful things there around dark web monitoring, and there's a security challenge and so on. And it gives you a score out of 100 to say, how strong are your passwords? How
Nice.
unique are your passwords? Do you have any duplicates in there? And then it highlights which ones, which websites or which applications that you've got across all your devices are the ones which, have been compromised, need a password change, need a stronger password, or otherwise are duplicated, right? So it really does walk you through that process of being friendly to use, but then drive that adoption and, educate people on
Is it doing that?
password hygiene.
Is it doing that, Lindsay, in terms of checking, say, dark web or openly accessible passwords? Is it searching that all the time, or is it an option? How does that work? So if you've got a credential, a bit like
Yep.
have I been pawned a little bit in terms of tells you
Yeah.
that your email's out there. Is it? I have seen that with passwords as well. If you are using a password that's been compromised.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so you can run the security challenge on a regular basis to
So you do have to
understand.
you have to trigger it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then at the admin level, the visibility into that password hygiene, if you're a university, to understand, what's good or bad password habits, comes through in the reporting. But it's, whether it's personal use or business use, I think what's really important to understand, and that's best practice, like it's zero knowledge in terms of we never know. So LogMeIn or LastPass as a company never knows the passwords.
Yeah.
The university never knows the passwords. They're all encrypted and
No,
stored
but
with the user.
what's the reporting parameters? What does the CISO see in terms of the reporting? Do they get a sort of an overview, strength of password use? How is the hygiene reported? What are some of the metrics that pop out?
So, number of duplicates, the complexity of the passwords, how applications are being accessed, in and out sort of thing. So you get, there's a wealth of different information, so you can really manage, the how often, when, by who, all that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So you get a real good sense of how your assets, are being challenged or accessed, by good or bad users, I guess. So,
So
it gives you that.
can map. Yeah, I take it you can probably map a bit of the heartbeat of a university when students are in and accessing certain applications. Correct. And okay, I can get that from potentially from a productivity viewpoint as well, as to who's the best lecturer, what students most come to those lectures. Could be one, I'm thinking.
Unintended benefit, perhaps.
That's it. Well, it's always in the analytics that, as I mentioned, we spoke to Kashira last week on data science. It's those data points, and security systems are always a good one. I think often overlooked in terms of what metadata and data they're collecting. Well, look, Lindsay, thank you so much for that. I think we've certainly touched on and certainly highlighted the issue around education and universities, and I did rattle off sort of a half a dozen, and it literally took me 30 seconds just to do a quick search on our websites in terms of what we've been covering, and they're all quite recent. So it's definitely seen education and health care is kind of the two sectors that have been hit hard due to COVID and the uptake in ransomware and cyber attacks and cyber activity. So Lindsay Brown, Vice President, APJ LogMeIn. Lindsay, maybe a call to action. Where would you sort of guide the audience if they're interested in learning more? I take it that you just go to LastPass, or what's a good website you'd go to?
LastPass.com is the first place to start, right? And as simple as downloading the app onto your iPhone, you can get cracking. So it's a real easy way. Integrates iPhone, Android, all that kind of stuff. But with your biometrics as well, right? So you talk about passwordless. Use your face, all that kind of stuff. It's really easy in that sense to get started and get rocking with the product. So go for it. It's free, so you can get started.
Beautiful. All right. Well, look, enjoy your day. Enjoy your weekend. I take it you're here in Sydney.
I'm here in Sydney, Chris. Enjoying the wonder of lockdown at the moment.
So enjoy your weekend. Hopefully the weather's not too good. Otherwise, it gets harder to stay indoors. But thanks for joining us on our Tech and Sec Weekly, Lindsay, and we'll stay in touch. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure, Chris. Thank you. Nice
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Okay. Very good. Thank you to Lindsay, and thank you to the team that set that up. I just want to finish off a couple of things. Now, I did reach out for this particular session, report of the day. Okay, I'll do that next. Global tech support scam research. This is out of Microsoft. Literally came out yesterday afternoon, and I've got another release this morning. This report is looking at the anatomy of tech support scams. It's quite a good report. It should be up on the marketplace by now. And this is the scam exposure had cost beyond the initial loss of money. And just looking through the sort of breakdown here, 59% exposed to scam. And as they continue through, and by the time they lost money to the scam, spent money on checking and repairing, invested time checking and repairing, or nothing happened. Around half of those continuing incurred a direct economic cost. And those who avoided direct scam losses spend time and money on repairs or to ensure their devices were not compromised. So you can check that report out, the report of the day from Microsoft, and that's worth having a look at. Also, we've just released, this followed on from Talisman Sabre, the Exercise 2021 up in Queensland last week. The Department of Defence released some footage to us, and we thought we'd put some together. We've released 3 videos out there. They should be available now, and I think 2 will be available after this episode as premieres. But the first one there is on firing I haven't got it in front of me. Can't think of the weapon now. No, it's not coming to me. The Patriot, I think it's the Patriot missile, that's the one. So it's the first time a Patriot missile has been fired from Australian soil. So there's some footage of that. So check that out on MySecTV on our YouTube channel. And then also just a shout out to Cybersecurity Asia 2021, Building Security in an Ultra-Connected World. That's in Kuala Lumpur. Let's hope this one here for the 11th to 12th of October. I'm going to be doing a report which is proud to be media partners as well with our Asia Pacific Security Magazine and our ASEANTechSec.com website as well. And a shout out to Karen and the team there at Thomville who put this together year on and year off, although they did have to cancel it naturally last year. But I'll be doing a talk on advanced technology and robotics and what we're seeing in technology as well. So looking forward to hopefully getting up to Kuala Lumpur or promoting this and speaking remotely. So check this one out. It will also be part of our event portfolio on the MySecurity Marketplace. So looking forward to that. And then also, now I did reach out, I won't mention the names, but we did reach out to a number of security companies, security guarding companies. None were available or even replied to an invitation to come on this morning and at least thank and recognise the frontline security officers out there and doing the important work that they do. So we'd like to at least publicly thank you from My Security Media and everybody on our team to those frontline security officers who are out there as part of COVID and also their day-to-day work. So that's International Security Officers Day is tomorrow, 24/7, and that's been promoted and run by the Australian Security Industry Association. So it's getting a bit of steam now, and that hopefully will be part of the recognised International Day. So well done to those out there serving their community and serving their companies as well and their clients. So thank you for that. And also, this will be out. I've been saying for a while, we're just going to do some additional editing, but this is an interview with Manoj Kumar with Secure ID, and funnily enough, sticking on identity management and credentials. Secure ID is also worth having a look at, enabling the remote workforce with modern authentication. And I mentioned also definitely sticking with the theme of working from home. We're going to be joined by Paul Hadji, the CEO of Harangi Cybersecurity, on Tuesday afternoon. So we'll talk more about that, particularly on misconfigured cloud infrastructure and the cybersecurity risks for Southeast Asian organisations. Final call, if you want to get into the Cyber Risk Leaders magazine, and these will be out shortly with the Australian Cybersecurity magazine, and that is it from us on the marketplace. So please enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend, and thank you for joining on our Tech and Sec Weekly. Bye-bye.